His father stood at the end of the restaurant table, raised his glass toward my husband, and pointed to the empty chair beside him that wasn't mine. "I saved that one for Vesper," Wendell announced. Someone who actually understood what Cohen was capable of. Then he turned to me, his daughter-in-law, at his own family dinner, and added with the particular warmth he'd perfected over years for insults he'd decided were compliments. "Some people build great things. Some people just watch the numbers." My brother-in-law Archer laughed. A real laugh, the kind that tells you someone has been waiting for the punchline. The table went quiet the specific way it goes quiet when everyone has agreed not to be the one who says something. I waited for Cohen to stop it. He stood up, set his napkin on the table, and took my hand in front of all of them. "Thank you," he said to his father. Wendell's face opened like he'd won something. For what? For making a decision we've been too patient to make ourselves. His father's smile hung there a beat longer than it should have. "What decision?" Cohen didn't raise his voice. He never does. "You'll find out tomorrow morning. My name is Tilda Osgood. I'm 32 years old. And that dinner, a Tuesday evening in April at a steakhouse off the Queenston Road in Hamilton, Ontario, was the night my father-in-law finally said the quiet part out loud. Welcome back to Mr. Nathaniel Stories, where quiet people stop letting other people write the numbers. If you've ever been the one a family counted on but never counted, settle in. Tell me where you're listening from and subscribe, because tomorrow changed everything. But let me take you back. A moment like that one doesn't arrive from nowhere. It gets built slowly by people who are certain they will never be handed the bill. I'm a forensic accountant, a CPA working in investigative practice, which means companies hire me when they suspect something in their books isn't adding up. Fraud, mismanagement, creative reporting. I walk in and I find the place where the numbers have been lying. It's painstaking, specific work, and I'm good at it. I can sit with 6 months of general ledger entries and feel the moment the pattern breaks, the way other people feel a change in weather. It's a strange thing to be that precise in your professional life and that willfully blind in your personal one. For most of my marriage, I kept a running mental account of everything I absorbed from Cohen's family, and I never totaled the column. Not because I didn't notice. I notice everything. I just wasn't ready to see the sum. Cohen noticed before I was willing to admit it. He's a structural engineer. He designs bridges and overpasses for a firm in Hamilton, and his particular gift is seeing what's under stress before it shows. He'd been watching his family put weight on me for 3 years while I kept telling him it was fine, it was just his dad's way, it wasn't personal. He knew it was personal. He'd known for a long time. It became undeniable the night we were driving home from a family barbecue, and he was quiet for 2 exits on the 403 before he said, "He introduced you to his neighbor tonight as Cohen's wife. She does taxes." He doesn't really understand what I do. He understands what Archer does. He introduced Archer as the future of the company. I didn't answer that. Because Cohen wasn't wrong, and because answering would have meant opening a drawer in myself, I kept locked. Let me tell you about the company. Wendell's business is called Hartwell Contracting. Residential roofing and exterior renovation work, operating in the Hamilton area for 22 years. The kind of company built on reputation. Word-of-mouth neighborhoods, church bulletins, repeat customers who trusted Wendell's father before they trusted him. At its best, it employed 14 people and had a backlog of work into the following spring. Wendell ran it with genuine pride and imprecise books. He trusted the rhythm more than the numbers, and for a long time the rhythm held. Then the pandemic years happened. Supply chain problems, material costs doubling. 2 key tradespeople walking out, a large commercial contract that fell through and left a 6-figure gap in projected revenue. By spring of 2021, Hartwell Contracting was carrying debt it couldn't service. Its line of credit was maxed, and the bank was making the kind of inquiries that suggest a worse call is coming. Wendell didn't tell anyone. That's the thing about men who've built something themselves. They carry the weight alone until they can't, and then they're furious when someone sees it. I found out the way I find everything out. Cohen mentioned offhand that his father seemed stressed, and I asked one careful question, and the answer didn't fit, and I asked another. By the end of a Sunday afternoon, I had pieced together what no one in that family had looked at directly. The company was 8 weeks from a serious default. If it went, Wendell lost not just the business, but the equipment, the contracts, the name his own father had started. I brought this to Cohen the way I always bring hard things, with the numbers already organized, so the feeling had somewhere to land. "How bad?" he said. I told him. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I got up and made tea neither of us drank. Then he said the thing I'd married him for, even though I hadn't understood that was the reason yet. Then we figure it out. Here's what we did, and I want to say it plainly because the plainness is the point. We didn't hand Wendell money and hope. We sat with a financial advisor and a lawyer, and we structured a private loan, documented, with a promissory note, with agreed terms. $70,000 at 0 interest over 5 years, with an optional extension. We drew it from our HELOC. We paid the legal fees. We did it properly because I do everything properly, and because I knew, even then, that a handshake arrangement in a family like this one would evaporate the moment it became inconvenient to remember. Wendell signed the agreement at our kitchen table in May of 2021, while Cohen made coffee, and I set each page in front of him one at a time. He looked at me over the document and said, "This feels like a lot of formality for family." "It protects you as much as us," I said. "If something happens to Cohen and me, your estate has a clear record of the obligation, no ambiguity for anyone." He signed. But the way he signed, Cap clicked back on the pen before he handed it across, told me the paperwork hadn't changed what he believed. He still thought of it as a favor from his son. The documentation was my idea, which made it my inconvenience, which made it somehow smaller than the money itself. Over the next 3 years, we extended the arrangement twice. Smaller amounts, a bridge loan for a materials crunch one autumn, a short-term advance when a commercial client was slow to pay. Total lent, just over $94,000. Total repaid, $31,000. In partial payments that tapered off once the company stabilized enough that Wendell seemed to forget the remainder was owing. I know the figure to the cent. I am, after all, a forensic accountant. What I also tracked, in the ledger I kept only in my head, was this. In the same 3 years, Wendell told his friends at the Legion that Cohen had taken the safe road, not like Archer, who was willing to get his hands dirty. He stood up at Christmas and told the family that Hartwell Contracting had turned a corner because of his own decisions, which was partly true. His decisions, and the $94,000 sitting quietly in the company's operating account. And he built a running joke at family dinners about my profession. "Tilda finds money that isn't there," he'd say, like investigative accounting was a parlor game. The kind of work you do because you couldn't find something real. I let all of it accumulate without writing it down. The way I'd trained myself in this family not to count. The thing that changed everything happened in 2 parts in the same 2-week stretch in February. The first was a letter from Cohen's firm, a project opportunity in Calgary. A senior structural lead role on a transit infrastructure build, 4 years, significant scope, the kind of work that turns a competent engineer into a recognized one. The number attached would change what the next decade looked like for us. We stood in our kitchen and we both understood without saying it that this letter was also the conversation we'd been not quite finishing for 2 years. The one about how long we were going to keep carrying a family that had decided we didn't need to be carried back. "It's a real offer," Cohen said, reading it a second time. I know. We'd have to decide what we're leaving. I looked at my father's surveying compass on the shelf by the window. He'd been a land surveyor, my dad, and when he died, he left me that compass and the habit of checking where you're actually standing before you take a step. I'd carried that habit into every audit I'd ever run. Let me get through the dinner first, I said. Wendell had already announced a celebration for Hartwell Contracting's 22nd anniversary, a private room at a steakhouse, the whole family invited. Some part of me, the part that had spent 3 years keeping things smooth, wanted one more ordinary evening before I stopped pretending the arrangement was sustainable. One more time at a table where I was overlooked, before I stopped sitting there. I didn't know I was describing exactly what the evening would be. The second thing happened 11 days before the dinner. A text from a number I didn't have saved. Tilda, my name is Vesper Lang. I think you should know something before Thursday. I'm sorry if this seems strange. Vesper Lang. The name landed in the specific way names land when you know of them without ever having met them. She and Cohen had dated briefly in their final year at McMaster, a few months that dissolved when she moved to Vancouver for a graduate architecture program. Not a weighted part of our story. Cohen had mentioned her once, the way you mention geography from a different decade. I had every reason to think about her now. I wrote back. About what? 3 dots. Then, about what Cohen's father asked me to do. I set the phone face down on the counter and looked at the compass on the shelf for a long moment, and I knew, the specific way you know a thing before you can prove it, that Wendell had done something deliberate. I told Cohen. He read the screen and something moved behind his eyes that wasn't jealousy. I want to be clear about that, there wasn't a trace of it. What I saw was closer to recognition, the recognition of a pattern finally completing itself. He found her, Cohen said. Through who? He thought about it. The architecture firm that bid on the Barton Street project last year. Vesper was on the team. Dad met her at the site walk. So he's had a direct line for months. He set the phone down carefully, the way he sets things down when he's already decided. Do you want to meet her? I said yes. We agreed I'd see her before the dinner, hear what she had to say, and then we'd go to the steakhouse and get through the evening as planned. Whatever came after would come after. I slept better that night than I had in months. The night before what would turn out to be the worst dinner of my life, I slept like the decision had already been made. Maybe it had. I met Vesper at a coffee shop near Locke Street on the Thursday afternoon, 2 hours before the dinner reservation. She was already there when I walked in. She stood up too fast, which told me everything I needed to know before she said a word. Cruel people are relaxed. She wasn't. Thank you for coming, she said. I almost didn't send that text. Tell me, I said, from the beginning. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Wendell contacted me in January. He said there was a family milestone dinner, a celebration, and would I like to come as an old friend catching up. He thought Cohen would love to see how far I'd come with my firm. She paused. And he told me, I want to say it the way he said it, because I want you to hear his exact words. He told me that you and Cohen had been struggling, that Cohen had never really found his footing the way he'd hoped, that seeing a familiar face, someone who remembered what he'd been passionate about before he settled. She stopped herself. Before he settled, I said. That's the word he used, yes. The words sat between us on the table, like something neither of us wanted to touch. I want to be honest with you, Vesper continued. I told myself I was going to come to check on an old friend. That's a kind story and it's about 40% true. Really? Your father-in-law is a persuasive man and I let myself be curious. She shook her head slowly. And then I looked at Cohen's project history from the last 4 years and I thought, this is not a man who didn't find his footing. This is someone doing serious work. She almost smiled, and it was a sad thing. And then I thought about the fact that Wendell had called his own son's life settling, and I decided to text you instead of showing up to a dinner I didn't fully understand. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt the specific hollow ache of a long-held suspicion about someone you've tried to love being confirmed by someone who owed you nothing at all. Are you still going to come tonight? I asked. She considered it. Do you want me to? Yes, I said, and I meant it, not as a weapon, As a witness, I wanted someone in that room who knew exactly how the evening had been arranged. She nodded slowly. Okay. At the door, she touched my arm briefly. Whatever you're doing tomorrow, he built his house on the wrong floor. She had no idea how right she was. The restaurant's private room had the lighting places use when they want an evening to feel significant. I stepped in and read the table immediately. Place cards, handwritten, in Wendell's blocky script. Wendell had never used place cards in his life. He seated people by instinct and old preference. Cards meant a plan. I found mine near the middle of the long table, between a cousin I barely knew and Cohen's Aunt Reva, who I had always quietly liked. And at Cohen's right hand, the seat that would have been mine in any ordinary arrangement, was a card that read Vesper. "Don't fuss over the seating, Tilda," Wendell said, passing with a bottle of wine. "Just thought it'd be nice to mix things up tonight." I sat down, I put my hands in my lap and I waited. Cohen arrived a few minutes after me. He read the table the way he reads a sight drawing, systematically, without showing anything, and I watched his jaw set. He came to me first, bent and said quietly, "All right?" I nodded once. He went to his chair. Archer was already 2 glasses in, loose and bright with the particular energy of someone enjoying something before it has even fully started. Wendell moved through the room like a man hosting the evening of his life. Then the door opened and Wendell walked Vesper in on his arm. "Everyone," he announced. "This is Vesper Lang, an old and very dear friend of Cohen's, and one of the most talented architects working in Ontario right now." I thought, what better night to have someone like that at the table than tonight? He steered her to the chair beside my husband, pleased with himself in a way he couldn't quite contain. Vesper's eyes found mine across the table for half a second. She sat. Wendell remained standing. He raised his glass. The room turned toward him. He smiled at Cohen, warm, expansive, and gestured toward Vesper. 22 years of Hartwell contracting, he began, and what I've learned is that the people around you determine what you become. I always believed Cohen had the potential to build something truly extraordinary. Sometimes we just need to be reminded of what that looks like. Then he looked at me. "Some people contribute in quieter ways," he said, "behind the scenes. That has its place too, of course." Archer raised his glass and said something about the next 22 years and laughed. Vesper's hands were flat on the tablecloth on either side of her plate. Her face had gone still in the specific way of someone who has just heard the performance she was recruited for and found it worse than she'd imagined. She said, just loud enough for the nearest seats, "Wendell, this isn't what you told me this dinner was." He didn't hear her, or he chose not to. He was watching me, waiting for the thing he'd built this whole evening to produce. The flush up my neck, the wet eyes, the small broken sound. The moment that would remind everyone at this table who was strong and who was not. I didn't give it to him. I want to say it was strength. Honestly, it was arithmetic. I have always been better at arithmetic than anything else, and what I was adding up sitting at that table was 4 years of payments. 2 signed promissory notes. $94,240. A legal agreement filed properly with a solicitor on King Street East, and a job offer letter sitting on our kitchen counter in Calgary, Alberta. The numbers were all mine. They held me up the way they always had. Cohen stood. He didn't scrape the chair or make it dramatic. He simply rose, unhurried, and buttoned one button of his jacket, the small, precise thing he does before a meeting that matters. He came around the table to me, took my hand in front of everyone, and turned to his father. "Thank you," he said. Wendell's face bloomed. I watched him believe he'd won. "For what?" Wendell said, glowing. "For making the decision we've been too patient to make ourselves." Something in the room shifted. Not a sound, an absence of one. "What decision?" Wendell said. His voice had found a new register. Cohen didn't raise his voice. He never does at the moments that count. "You'll find out tomorrow morning." He didn't explain, didn't lay it out for the table. He just held my hand and let the sentence sit there, unanswered, while his father stood at the head of a room he'd booked to celebrate a business that was still operating, quietly, invisibly, because of us. Archer had stopped smiling. Aunt Riva, beside me, set down her fork. "Cohen," Wendell said, and his voice had lost its occasion. "What is this about?" "It's about a good night's sleep," Cohen said pleasantly. "We'll talk in the morning. Enjoy the dinner, Dad." He pulled out my chair, and we left. We drove home through Hamilton in the kind of silence that isn't empty. At a red light on Main Street, Cohen put his hand on my knee. "You were counting," he said. "I'm always counting." "What's the number?" $94,240, I said. Canadian. He squeezed my knee once and drove. My phone started lighting up before we got home. 2 calls from Wendell, a text, "Cohen, call me back." Then another, "That was embarrassing. I was doing something nice for this family and you made it into a scene." Then a voicemail I listened to standing in the kitchen with my coat still on. His voice doing the thing it does when he's chosen righteous over honest, the particular register he uses when he needs the story to go his way. "You have no idea what this family has sacrificed. Your father would understand that, Tilda, if you'd ever stopped to think about it." My father was a surveyor. He spent 30 years walking across land no one had mapped yet, finding where things actually were rather than where people assumed them to be. I'd carried that habit into every audit of my career. He would have understood tonight perfectly. I set the phone down and looked at the compass on the shelf. At 11 that night, Vesper texted, "I owe you a proper apology. I should have called you the same day Wendell first reached out. I talked myself into thinking I was being neutral. I wasn't. I was rationalizing cowardice." I wrote back, "You came. You told me the truth when it mattered." She replied after a moment, "Whatever you're doing tomorrow," from someone who's been on job sites with that man. He has never once credited the person holding the drawings. I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen at midnight, for the first time in longer than I could remember. The next morning, Cohen called the family's solicitor and sent formal notice under the promissory note. Not a demand for immediate payment, we weren't there to burn anything down. A notice of our intent to transition the loan to standard commercial terms within 90 days, with an offer to connect Wendell with a business advisor we already knew and trusted, someone who could help Hartwell Contracting refinance properly through a real commercial lender. We did not send it to humiliate him. We sent it because a private family loan that had never truly been acknowledged needed to become real before we left. Before we moved to Calgary and took our patients with us. Then we drove to the house. Wendell answered the door before we knocked. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, which was fair. "Whatever you think last night was," he started. "Can we come in?" I said. It wasn't quite a question. We sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where he'd signed the promissory note 4 years ago, and I set the folder on the wood between us. I didn't slide it at him, I didn't perform it. I just set it there, manila and ordinary, and let him look at it. "What is that?" he said. "The paper trail," I said. "Everything in order, so you don't have to take my word for any of it." Cohen opened the folder and turned the pages toward him one at a time. The original loan agreement, the 2 amendments, the payment ledger, every transfer dated with the source account. $94,240. "This," Cohen said, and his voice was quiet and level, the voice he uses when something real is happening, "is the reason Hartwell Contracting is still operating. This is what kept the line of credit from being called in 2021. This is what covered the materials crunch in 2022. Tilda structured it, documented it, and has tracked every cent for 4 years. We never once asked you to acknowledge it. But it's real. It has been real the entire time you were telling people she watches numbers from the sidelines." Wendell stared at the pages. I watched him try in real time to hold on to the story he'd lived inside for 4 years. I watched it slip, the way I watch a set of books stop adding up when the figure that was always wrong finally gets isolated. "You said it was family," he said finally. It is family, Cohen said. That's exactly why we documented it, instead of handing you cash and hoping. Tilda protected you. The paperwork protected you. I slid the last page across, a letter from the business advisor, offering a no-cost first consultation. We're moving to Calgary, I said. Cohen is accepting the offer. We'll be gone in 6 weeks. We're not taking anything from you. The notice you received this morning is a transition, not a demand. The remaining $63,000, we're writing it off. Consider it our contribution to a family business we chose to quietly support. You just need to be standing on your own by the time we're gone. And you can be. With the right help, you can be. Wendell's mouth opened and closed. That's not punishment, I said. That's us taking care of our own. It just looks different than you expected it to. For the first time since I'd known him, my father-in-law had nothing to say back. The family group chat happened that afternoon. I wasn't watching it, but Aunt Reva sent me a screenshot with 3 words of her own attached at the top. I knew it. Archer had gotten there first. He'd written that Tilda and Cohen were ambushing the family, that this was an attack on everything Wendell had built, that Cohen was abandoning his father after everything the family had given him over the years. Reva's reply was short, public, and precise. Archer, she wrote, do you know whose name is on the promissory note that kept this company alive in 2021? Because I sat at that kitchen table. I saw the folder. Do you know? 3 dots appeared from Wendell's account, then disappeared, then appeared again, then nothing. The chat went silent, the specific way of a room full of people who have just realized they may have been standing on the wrong side of something for a very long time. Reva texted me privately an hour later. He told me after Christmas that you'd made the whole arrangement into something more than it was. I told him I'd seen the signature page. He didn't answer me. I sat with that for a long time. 4 years I'd kept those documents in a filing cabinet, half hoping I'd never need to open it, half knowing I always would. We left Hamilton on the 14th of June. 4 days later, I pulled into a neighborhood in Calgary I'd only seen in photos. The house was smaller than our Hamilton place. It had more light in the mornings. There was a hook beside the front door that I hadn't put anything on yet. That first night, while Cohen was assembling the bed frame and I was unpacking the kitchen, I found my father's compass at the bottom of the bag I'd carried it in and set it on the windowsill where it would catch the morning sun. And I thought about my father-in-law, standing at the end of a restaurant table in April, raising a glass over a business we'd been quietly holding together for 4 years, telling a room full of people that I watched from the sidelines. He wasn't entirely wrong. I am someone who watches. I watch numbers. I watch patterns. I watch for the place in a ledger where the story someone is telling doesn't match the one the figures are telling. I have built an entire career on it. And what I'd watched for 4 years was a family decide that the person keeping the lights on was the one who didn't deserve a seat at the table. You can only watch that for so long before you do the one thing the watchers always eventually do. You write it down. Every dollar, every date, every transfer. $94,240, documented to the cent, in a folder that waited in a filing cabinet until the night I needed it to be real in front of the people who had spent 4 years pretending it wasn't. It was always real. I just finally stopped holding the drawer shut. A week after we'd settled in, I got a text from Wendell. 4 sentences. He'd met with the business advisor. The refinancing was proceeding. He expected it to be completed by August. He hoped we were well in Calgary. No apology, no thank you, no use of my name. 4 sentences. Wendell's version of reaching across a distance he'd made. I read it twice, put my phone face down on the kitchen counter of a house with both our names on the deed, and no one else's expectations built into the walls, and I let it be enough. Needing it to be more would have been the old version of me, the one keeping the ledger in her head, still hoping the columns would eventually balance in her favor. They balanced. I just had to stop letting someone else hold the pen. My name is Tilda Osgood. I'm 32 years old. My father-in-law arranged a dinner to remind a room full of people what my husband could have been without me. And it turned out to be the night I finally stopped explaining what I was and started living like I already knew. If you've ever been the person a family counted on and never counted, if you've carried the invisible weight and watched someone else take the bow, there are more stories on this channel about people who finally put the ledger on the table. They're right here. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.